Now, I've seen a lot of complicated patterns out there, and I don't understand how they were generated. And I've created some of them myself just by experimenting with different functions, and I can create some pretty cool patterns, but I wasn't sure exactly what was going on with them. So I'm going to look at some of those next. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this, and I'm actually going to create some variables here. I'm going to create a variable, I'm going to call it sx, which is equal to x times a divided by w. So that's for my scaled x value. And then I'm going to create a variable sy equals x times a divided by w. So I have two variables, and and then I'm just going to put in here sx plus sy. Oh, this needs to be a y. There. So I get sx plus sy. I get these diagonal stripes, and so that's sort of interesting. I'm going to add I can control how many stripes I get with this. It goes down to 0. There's how I could even go minus or plus. Like that. Not too exciting, but I'd like to control those more. And it sort of reminds me of the function y equals x. So if I think of mathematics and Cartesian coordinates, I'm thinking, okay, y equals x. I'm getting a 45-degree angle here. Looks like that function. So I'm going to just change this a little bit more. What if I have, let's put a slope on those. So I'll add a couple of variables down here. I'll call it cx and cy. But I'll put a constant in front of these, multiply them by a constant. So I'll multiply x by a constant x and y by a constant y. Another scaling factor. So if I have cy set to 0, cx set to 1, now I get vertical lines. If I set them both to 1, I get 45-degree angle. If I set this one to 0, I get horizontal lines. So I can control, and then this one controls, and then this one controls how many lines I have. So I could add more lines or less lines. All right. So I started thinking about that, and I want to know, I'm going to just zoom in on this. Why does that work the way that that works? So if I look at this function and the input, I know that every time it changes a value, goes up by a value, that it's going to change from white to black, black to white. And based on that, I can tell how many lines I get. And what it's really doing is it's creating a surface, right? In this case, it's a sloped surface. It's going up at an angle. And then this is taking cross sections through that surface, right? It's taking sections through that. Every time it goes up by a certain amount, it's going to change from white to black, white to black. So it's sort of like these are contour lines of a three-dimensional surface. So this input that I'm putting into this is like a surface, and I'm taking contours of that surface. And every time it changes by a value of 1, it's going to change the contour of that. All right. So I'm going to go and make this a little more complicated. So let's say if I do what would happen if I do x squared? All right, so plus cxx, I'll call it, times sx, I can do squared like that. and I could make a y squared. So let's do that. Plus sx+cxy times sy up to the second power. Okay, now I got to add a couple of variables, cxx and cyy. So now I can square this and square that one. But it's not just creating a, it's not like really plotting those lines, it's creating a contour surface. So as the slope of this surface gets more, I get more lines. Okay, so the slope of curvature, the amount of curvature of the surface gets greater. I'm getting more lines in my image. Okay, that's what's happening. I'm putting in a three-dimensional surface and I'm generating contour lines from that surface. That's what happens when you put in a complicated formula like that. And since this formula can be, there's a lot of different, you can multiply, you can put in sine, cosine, a lot of different factors in here. You're generating contours. I could add more stuff, so I set up a bunch of things in another filter, and so I'll just open up that one. I call it polynomial, and I set it up as a generalized polynomial. So I'm going to zoom in on that. And so I set up my variable, two variables, sx. In this case, I wanted to have an offset, and it turns out that the offset works best if you leave it outside of the, if you don't scale it. So I have xo and yo as offsets. Then I have cx times sx, then cxx times sx squared, or sx times sx. You could do it either way. cy times sy, and cyy times sy squared, and then cxy times x times y. So I could have, when I look at generalized polynomial surface, I can have not just y times y, I can have x times y, right? And then I have a c0, which is just an offset. So that's the formula, and then I added the variables down here. I have an a for overall scaling, which really is increasing the slope, or increasing the size of everything. I have x and y offsets for positioning it in x and y, and then I have a constant offset which will cycle through the black and white levels or shift it. It's shifting the surface up, but that changes the position of where the contours occur. So if I do 0.5, it'll do something like that. And just leave that off. And then I have a slope for x. So I can increase or decrease that, or go negative. I have a slope for y. I can increase or decrease that, or go negative. I have a curvature for x, curvature for y. And so if I turn the curvature on for both, I get sort of a circle. I'll just turn. Now it's shifted. I thought it would be in the middle, but because these are contour lines, my surface is shifting, and so that's why it does that. So I'm going to turn these down to 0. So there I have my nice circular shape, although the rings are not the same size, but that's okay. It's a polynomial. It's like a parabola turned upside down, a bowl, or up like this. So it's curving up like that, and then it's contour lines every time those change. Okay, so so that makes sense. So yeah, so I could change this to like that, have a saddle point or a hyperbola like that, and then I can, let's do, yeah, or I could have a slope on here like that. So I can create a pretty wide variety of shapes with this, but one of the things that I finally realized was these are like, I'm putting in a basically a three-dimensional surface, and then these are the contour lines, which explains why it seems so complicated because it is really pretty complicated. So that's all I'm going to do for this video. Let me know if you have any comments or questions, and thanks for watching.